"If you're a real cowboy, ride my stallion," dared the widow. 25 men failed. Lonely Cowboy didn't. The small frontier town woke up slowly, like it always did. The sun rose behind the low hills, turning the sky a soft orange and gold. Dust floated in the air as the first wagons rolled down the main road. A few shop doors opened with long, tired creaks. Most people in town already knew what the day would bring, because the same talk had filled the streets for weeks. At the edge of town stood a quiet ranch with a wide wooden fence and a stable that had seen better days. The widow lived there. She was not old, but life had left its marks on her face. Her husband had passed away years ago, and since then she had carried the ranch on her own shoulders. She fixed broken boards, counted feed bags, and woke before the sun to make sure every animal was safe. She did not complain. She did not ask for help. She just kept going, one day at a time. In the stable behind her house lived the stallion. The horse was tall, strong, and dark, with a thick mane that fell like a shadow over his neck. His eyes were sharp and watchful. He did not trust easily. Some said he had been treated badly before he came to the ranch. Others said he was just born wild. No one truly knew the story, but everyone knew the result. Any man who tried to ride him ended up in the dirt. At first it had been a small thing. One man had tried and failed, then another. Soon, the challenge became a kind of game. Men from nearby towns came to test themselves. They laughed loud, slapped each other on the back, and talked big about how they would be the one who finally stayed on the stallion. The widow watched it all from her porch or the fence line. At first she did not mind. She thought it might bring life back to the town. But after a while the noise and the jokes began to feel empty. Most of the men did not care about the horse. They only cared about winning. That morning, she stood near the stable, brushing dust off her hands. The stallion stood inside, calm but alert, his ears moving at every sound. She spoke to him softly, the same way she did every day. He did not understand her words, but he understood her tone. It was steady and kind. Down the road, a rider appeared. The lonely cowboy came into town without anyone noticing at first. His horse walked slowly, its head low, tired from a long journey. The man sat straight in the saddle, but his shoulders carried a quiet weight. He wore a worn jacket and boots marked by many miles. His hat was pulled low, hiding most of his face, but his eyes were calm and careful as he looked around. He did not ride like someone looking for trouble or attention. He rode like someone looking for a place to rest. He tied his horse near the small inn and stepped down. The wooden boards under his boots creaked. A few people glanced his way, but no one spoke to him. He went inside, paid for a simple meal, and sat alone at a corner table. Around him the same story was being told again. Men talked about the stallion. They laughed about who had fallen the hardest. They bragged about who would try next. The lonely cowboy listened, but he did not join in. He ate slowly, his eyes on the window, watching dust move in the sunlight. Later that day he walked through town looking for small work. He helped an old man fix a broken wagon wheel. He carried water for a shop owner whose well had run dry. He did not ask for much in return, just enough for a meal and a place to sleep. By late afternoon he found himself near the widow's ranch. The fence had a loose board hanging by one nail. He stopped and looked at it for a moment. Then, without a word, he pulled the board back into place and fixed it as best he could. The widow saw him from a distance. She did not call out. She just watched. When he finished, he turned to leave. That was when she spoke. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was a softness in it. He tipped his hat slightly. It needed fixing. They stood there for a moment, not knowing what else to say. The stallion made a quiet sound inside the stable. The cowboy's eyes moved toward the noise. "That's him," the widow said, "the one everyone talks about." He nodded, but he did not smile. "He looks like he's been through a lot." She studied him. Most men looked at the horse like it was a prize. This man looked at it like it was a living thing with a story. The next day, more riders came. The town gathered near the ranch. People stood on fences and wagons to get a better look. The widow stayed near the stable, her arms crossed, her face calm but tired. One man stepped forward, full of confidence. He jumped onto the stallion's back, barely giving the horse time to breathe. The stallion reacted at once. He moved fast, twisting and jumping. Dust flew into the air. Within moments, the rider hit the ground. The crowd laughed and clapped. The widow turned away. The lonely cowboy stood at the edge of the group. He did not laugh. He did not cheer. He just watched the stallion settle back into place, breathing hard, his eyes wide. That night, the cowboy returned to the ranch. He did not go to the stable. He stopped at the fence. "I'm not here to ride," he said when the widow came out. "I just wanted to ask if I could help." She looked at him, surprised.
Help with what? Anything.
She thought for a moment, then nodded. "The water barrel needs filling." He did the work without complaint. When he finished, he left. The next day, he came back again. This time he helped clean the stable. He stayed quiet, moving slowly, so he would not startle the stallion. The horse watched him closely, but did not move away. Over the next few days, the cowboy kept coming. He did not touch the horse at first. He just stood nearby, talking softly or brushing the ground. The stallion began to relax a little, lowering his head, breathing easier. The widow watched from a distance. Something about the way this man moved felt different. He was not trying to prove anything. He was just being there. One evening, as the sun dropped low, she walked up to him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Because someone has to take the time?" She nodded. She understood that more than he knew. The town still talked. People laughed about how slow he was. They said he would fail just like the others. The widow did not answer them. The stallion began to change. Not in a big way, but in small ones. He stopped pacing as much. He allowed the cowboy to stand closer. One day he let the man brush his mane. The widow felt a quiet hope grow inside her, not just for the horse, but for herself too. She had spent so long standing alone, guarding her heart like she guarded her ranch. Watching this man show patience day after day reminded her that not everything had to be a fight. The morning the cowboy finally asked to ride, the town gathered again, but this time it felt different. There was no shouting, no loud jokes. People watched in silence as the cowboy walked toward the stallion, his hand gentle, his step slow. The widow stood nearby, her hands clasped, her heart beating fast. The stallion did not pull away. He did not rear. He just stood, breathing steady. The cowboy placed his hand on the horse's neck, feeling the warmth there. He did not rush. He did not force anything. The town held its breath. The morning after the quiet moment at the stable, the town did not talk about much else. People gathered near the well, outside the store, and in front of the inn, all wondering what would happen next. Some said the lonely cowboy would fail like all the others. Some said he might be different. The widow stayed away from the noise. She focused on her work, feeding the animals and checking the fence, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the way the stallion had stood so calm the day before. The cowboy did not come early that day. The widow noticed the empty space near the fence where he usually stood. She felt a small worry she did not expect. By midday, the sun was high, and the dust on the road shimmered in the heat. Then she saw him, walking toward the ranch with slow, steady steps. He carried a small sack of feed on his shoulder. "I thought he might like this," he said, setting it down near the stable. She nodded. "That's kind of you." They stood in the shade for a moment, watching the stallion inside. The horse lifted his head when he saw the cowboy and made a soft sound, not loud, not sharp, just a sound of notice.
"That's new," the widow said quietly. The cowboy smiled. "Just a little."
He did not try to ride that day. Instead, he opened the sack and poured some of the feed into the trough. He stepped back and waited. The stallion moved forward slowly, careful but not afraid. He began to eat, his ears relaxed. The widow felt a warm feeling in her chest. It had been a long time since she had seen the horse so at ease. Word spread fast. People came to watch from the fence. They whispered to each other, pointing at the stallion and the man standing nearby. Some shook their heads, not believing what they saw. Later that afternoon, the cowboy helped the widow fix a broken gate. They worked side by side, passing tools back and forth. They did not talk much, but the quiet felt easy, not heavy. When the sun started to go down, the sky turned soft and orange again. The cowboy wiped his hands on his pants and stepped back to look at the gate. "That should hold," he said. "It will," she answered. "Thank you." He tipped his hat. "I'll see you tomorrow." She watched him walk away, his shape growing smaller down the road. She did not know why, but she already missed his presence. The next day, more people came to the ranch than usual. The town wanted to see if the cowboy would finally try to ride. The widow felt a tight feeling in her stomach as she saw the crowd gathering again. The cowboy arrived, calm as always. He looked at the people, then at the stallion. He took a slow breath. "I'll try today," he said to the widow. She nodded, but her hands trembled just a little. He walked into the stable, his steps soft. He placed his hand on the stallion's neck. The horse shifted, but did not pull away. The cowboy spoke quietly, words that no one else could hear. He brought the saddle closer, letting the horse smell it. He waited. The stallion did not move. He slowly placed the saddle on the horse's back. The crowd leaned forward. The cowboy tightened the strap gently, giving the horse time to adjust. He stepped back, watching, waiting. The stallion stamped once, then stood still. The widow held her breath. The cowboy placed one foot in the stirrup. He paused. The horse stayed calm. Slowly he lifted himself up and sat in the saddle. For a moment, everything was still. Then the stallion moved. Not fast, not wild, just a slow step forward. The cowboy stayed steady, his hands light on the reins. He did not pull. He did not push. He moved with the horse, not against him. The stallion took another step, then another. The town was silent. No one laughed. No one spoke. They made a slow circle inside the fence. Dust rose under the horse's hooves. The cowboy stayed on. The widow felt tears in her eyes, but she did not wipe them away. After a few minutes, the cowboy guided the stallion back to the stable. He slid down from the saddle and stood beside the horse, his hand resting on its neck. The crowd finally made noise. Some clapped, some cheered, some just stood there, amazed. The cowboy did not look at them. He looked at the stallion. "Well done," he said softly. The widow walked up to him. "You did it." He shook his hand. "We did it." That night the town felt different. People talked, but their voices were softer. The challenge was no longer a joke. It had become a story of patience, not pride. The widow invited the cowboy to stay for supper. They sat at a small table in her kitchen, the light from the lamp casting warm shadows on the walls. She made simple food, but it tasted better than anything she had eaten in a long time. They talked about small things at first: the weather, the town, the work that needed to be done on the ranch. Then she asked, "Where did you come from?" He looked down at his plate. "A long way from here." She did not push. He asked about her husband. She told him, not in great detail, but enough. She spoke of how the ranch had felt empty after he was gone, how the stallion had come to her during that time, wild and hurting, just like she had been. The cowboy listened. Days turned into a week. The cowboy stayed. He helped with the ranch, fixing roofs, cleaning stalls, and mending fences. The stallion followed him more often, staying close, trusting. The widow began to laugh again. Small laughs at first, then real ones. She felt lighter, like the air around her had changed. The town noticed. People waved when they passed. Some offered help. The ranch no longer felt like a lonely place at the edge of town. It felt like part of something again. One afternoon, a group of riders came from a nearby town. They had heard the story and wanted to see the man who stayed on the wild stallion. They challenged him, joking, asking him to ride again to show off. The cowboy shook his head. There's nothing to prove. The riders laughed, but they did not push. That night, the widow and the cowboy sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. The sky was clear, and the air was cool. I never thought this place would feel warm again, she said quietly. He looked at the lights in the sky. Sometimes it just needs time. She looked at him, seeing the miles in his eyes, the quiet strength in the way he held himself. The stallion stood in the yard, calm and steady, watching them. The widow realized that what had started as a simple challenge had become something else entirely. It had brought a man to her door, and with him, a chance to feel hope again. The cowboy did not say he would stay forever. He did not promise anything. But every morning he was still there, ready to work, ready to listen, ready to move forward one step at a time. The days after the quiet ride passed in a gentle rhythm. Morning light spilled across the ranch, and the sound of birds mixed with the soft steps of the animals waking up. The widow rose before the sun like she always did, but now she was not alone in the yard. The lonely cowboy was already there, carrying water, checking the fence, and moving with a calm purpose that felt steady and kind. The stallion followed him more closely than ever. Where once the horse had stayed near the stable, now he walked the length of the fence, watching the man work. Sometimes, when the cowboy stopped, the horse stopped too. The widow noticed these small moments and felt a quiet warmth grow inside her. One morning, as they worked side by side in the field, the widow spoke without looking up. "You don't have to stay." The cowboy paused, then went back to his work. "I know." They let the words sit in the air. She did not mean to send him away. She just wanted to understand why he stayed. That afternoon, a rider came into town carrying news from a nearby place. There was trouble on the road, he said. A group of wagons had broken down near a narrow pass. Supplies were scattered, and some animals had run off. The town listened, but no one moved. It was far, and the road was rough. The widow heard the talk later at the store. When she returned to the ranch, she found the cowboy saddling his horse. "I'm going to help," he said. She felt a tight pull in her chest. "You don't even know them." He tied the strap and checked it twice. "Doesn't matter." The stallion stood nearby, watching. "I'll be back," the cowboy added. "Just a day, maybe two." She nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Be careful." He tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode out of town. The dust followed him down the road until he was just a small shape against the hills. The ranch felt quiet again, like it had before he arrived. The widow went through her work, but every task felt slower. The stallion paced near the fence, his ears turned toward the road. Night came, and the stars filled the sky. The cowboy did not return. The next morning, the widow woke with a heavy feeling. She fed the animals and checked the stable. The stallion ate, but he kept lifting his head, looking out. By midday, a rider came into town with more news. The wagons had been helped, but there had been a fall on the narrow pass. A horse had slipped. A man had been hurt. The widow felt her heart race. She did not wait for details. She saddled her old mare, tied her coat tight, and rode toward the pass. The road was long and rough. Dust rose under her horse's hooves. Her thoughts ran faster than the wind. She did not know what she would find, only that she could not stay behind and wonder. When she reached the pass, she saw a small group near the edge of the road. A wagon stood still, one wheel broken. A few people were gathered around someone sitting on a rock. It was the cowboy. He looked up when he saw her. His arm was wrapped in a cloth, but he smiled. "You came," he said. She felt her knees grow weak, but she stayed in the saddle. "You said you'd be back in a day," he shrugged. It took a little longer. She climbed down and walked to him. "What happened?" He pointed to the broken wheel. Tried to lift it with another man. Slipped. Landed wrong. She checked his arm. Careful. Gentle. It was not serious, but it was sore. "You don't know when to stop," she said. He looked at the wagons, the people who now smiled and thanked him. Someone had to help. They rode back together as the sun began to fall. The widow stayed close, watching him, making sure he was steady in the saddle. When they reached the ranch, the stallion let out a soft sound. He walked up to the fence and stood there, calm, watching them dismount. The widow felt a strange mix of relief and worry. She had not realized how much this man had come to matter to her. That night, she made a fire outside and warmed water for his arm. She wrapped it again, her hands gentle. "Why do you always help?" she asked quietly. He looked at the flames. "Because once, a long time ago, no one helped me." She did not ask more. She did not need to. The days that followed felt deeper, like something unseen had settled between them. They worked together, shared meals, and sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sky change colors. The town noticed. People no longer talked about the challenge. They talked about the man who helped the wagons. They talked about the stallion who now stood calm and steady at the fence. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast. Dark clouds filled the sky, and the wind picked up dust and leaves. The widow and the cowboy rushed to secure the animals. The stallion grew restless, moving back and forth in the stable. A loud crack of thunder echoed across the land. The stallion reared, striking the stable door. The latch gave way. The horse ran out into the open field, rain starting to fall in heavy drops. The widow called out, but the wind took her voice. The cowboy ran after the stallion, his steps fast but careful. The ground was slick. The rain soaked his jacket. He moved closer, speaking softly, even though the storm roared around them. The stallion slowed, then stopped. The cowboy stood a few steps away, holding out his hand. The widow watched from a distance, her heart in her throat. The stallion lowered his head. He took a step forward, then another. The cowboy placed his hand on the horse's neck. Steady and calm, they walked back together as the rain fell, slow and sure. When the storm passed, the sky cleared and a soft light filled the air. The widow felt tears on her face, but this time she smiled. That evening they sat inside, the fire warm, the sound of rain still on the roof. "You don't run from much, do you?" she said. He looked at the flames. "I used to run from everything." She reached out and touched his hand. He did not pull away. The stallion stood outside the door, quiet and calm, like a guard watching over the night. The widow realized that this story was no longer about a challenge or a horse or a lonely man passing through. It was about two people who had both been carrying their pasts alone, now finding a way to share the weight. The cowboy did not say he would stay forever, but as the fire burned low and the night grew quiet, he was still there. And for the first time in a long while, the widow felt like the future was not something to fear, but something to walk toward, one slow, steady step at a time. The days after the storm passed slowly, but with a quiet new energy. The ranch felt alive in a way it hadn't for years. The grass was greener after the rain, and the smell of damp earth mixed with the hay in the stables. The stallion, once wild and unpredictable, moved calmly through the yard. His coat glistened in the sunlight, and he let the widow and the cowboy approach without hesitation. The bond between the man and the horse had grown in the days since the storm, and the widow noticed the difference with a soft, steady satisfaction. The cowboy spent his mornings checking fences, feeding animals, and helping with repairs that the widow had been postponing for months. Each small task they completed together seemed to create a rhythm that was comforting and familiar. The widow began to rely on him in ways she hadn't realized she needed. She realized she was no longer carrying everything alone, and that realization brought her a quiet relief. The town continued to talk about the cowboy and the stallion, but the tone had changed. No longer were they laughing about men being thrown off the horse. People now spoke with respect, noticing the care and patience the man showed. Even the children who used to chase after the stable door now approached with quiet curiosity, watching him feed the animals or brush the stallion's mane. He never spoke harshly to anyone or anything. His presence was calm, and it seemed to teach others to be calm as well. One afternoon, the widow suggested they plant a small garden near the edge of the ranch. The soil was rich from the recent rains, and she thought it could produce vegetables and herbs that would help them both. The cowboy agreed without hesitation. They worked side by side, digging the soil, planting seeds, and watering carefully. The task was simple, but it allowed them to talk more freely. The cowboy told her about the small towns he had passed through on his journey, and she shared stories about the ranch and her late husband. They did not speak of deep sorrow, but of everyday life, what it had been and what it could be again. Evenings became a time they both looked forward to. After the chores, they would sit on the porch, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. The stallion would stand nearby, quiet, observing them with gentle eyes. The widow found herself laughing more often, enjoying the simple conversation and the warmth that had returned to her home. She realized that life had begun to feel full again, even after years of loneliness and hardship. One day, a letter arrived in town for the widow. It was from a distant relative, someone she had not heard from in many years. The letter spoke of family business, of a request for help, and of matters that required her attention. She read it slowly, considering what it meant for the ranch and for her. The cowboy noticed the change in her expression. "What will you do?" he asked gently. She folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. "I will handle it," she said. "But it might take me away for a few days," he nodded. "I can take care of things here while you're gone." The thought of leaving the ranch, even for a short time, had not been easy. But knowing the cowboy would be there to look after the stallion and the daily tasks brought her peace. The trust she felt toward him had grown steadily, and it was something she had never expected to find again. Before she left, she walked the ranch with him. They checked the fences, ensured the animals were fed, and made sure the stallion had fresh water and hay. The horse followed them closely, calm and obedient. As the widow mounted her horse, she felt a wave of gratitude for the cowboy and his steady presence. "I'll be back soon," she said softly. "I'll be here," he replied. During her absence, the cowboy managed the ranch with care. He noticed small details, like a broken board in the fence, or the way the stallion seemed restless when the wind blew from the north. He adjusted and repaired quietly, without complaint. When visitors came into town asking about the widow or the stallion, he answered politely, never boasting, always respectful. Several days later, the widow returned. She found the ranch in excellent condition, the animals healthy, and the stallion calm and content. She dismounted and hugged the cowboy briefly. "You did well," she said, her voice warm and sincere. He shook his head. "We did well," he said, glancing at the stallion who was now standing quietly in the yard. The days passed, and the bond between the widow and the cowboy grew stronger. They began planning small projects together, repairing the roof of the barn, clearing an old orchard, and creating a place near the porch for an outdoor garden. Their shared work and quiet companionship built a rhythm in the ranch that neither had expected, but both came to cherish. One afternoon, the widow suggested they take the stallion for a ride across the open fields. The man agreed. They saddled the horse carefully, and for the first time, the widow mounted as well. The stallion moved steadily, responding to both of them, calm and sure. The wind blew through their hair. The grass brushed against the horse's legs, and the sun warmed their faces. It was a moment of freedom, not just for the horse, but for both of them. The widow realized how much trust and patience had built this life. Trust in the man, patience with the horse, and a slow rediscovery of joy in daily life. In the evenings, as the sun set, they would sit together and talk quietly about their days. The cowboy shared stories of distant places he had traveled, the people he had met, and the challenges he had faced. The widow spoke of her life on the ranch, of hopes she had once held and dreams she still wanted to reach. They did not rush their conversations. They simply shared, quietly, fully, and with respect. The town began to notice more than just the calm stallion and the helpful cowboy. They noticed a change in the widow as well. She walked taller, smiled more freely, and seemed lighter. People remarked that she seemed happier, more at ease. The quiet strength between her and the cowboy inspired others in small ways. Neighbors offered small favors. Children visited more often, and the ranch became a place where people came not just to see the stallion, but to feel a sense of calm and community. One late afternoon, The widow and the cowboy stood near the stable, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The air was warm, and a soft breeze carried the scent of hay and wildflowers. "I never thought this place could feel so alive again," the widow said. The cowboy smiled. "Sometimes it just takes a little patience." The stallion stood quietly nearby, watching them, his dark eyes soft and steady. He had been through a long journey of his own, from fear and distrust to calm and trust, and now he seemed content to stay by their side, steady and loyal. The widow realized that life, much like the stallion, required patience, understanding, and kindness. She had been guarding herself for years, expecting hardship and disappointment. But now she had found a companion who shared her burdens, a partner who respected the land, the animals, and her. The trust she felt for the cowboy went beyond words. It was quiet, steady, and real. Evenings turned into nights filled with stars, and mornings brought with them the soft light of a new day. Together they worked the ranch, cared for the animals, and grew stronger as a team. Life was not perfect, but it was full, and it was shared. The widow began to look forward to the days ahead. She no longer felt alone. She had someone who would stand beside her through storms, who would help her lift burdens, and who would treat the stallion with the care it deserved. The lonely cowboy, once a stranger passing through town, had become a constant, a steady presence in a life that had once seemed empty. And through it all, the stallion moved quietly through the yard, a reminder of the patience, trust, and calm that had brought them all together. Together they faced the days with steady hearts, learning that true strength comes from understanding, patience, and quiet companionship, not from pride, challenge, or the need to prove oneself. In those long days of work and quiet evenings under the sky, the widow and the cowboy realized that life's true victories were not in daring rides or loud triumphs. They were in the trust, kindness, and shared moments that built a life worth living. And for the first time in years, the widow felt she had found that life again. The mornings on the ranch had grown calm and warm, almost peaceful in a way the widow had not felt for years. The sun spilled light over the hills and fields, and the air smelled of fresh hay, wet earth from morning dew, and the soft fragrance of wildflowers along the fence line. The stallion, now fully calm and confident, walked steadily through the yard, his mane shining in the early light. He no longer tossed his head nervously or reacted to every sound. The cowboy had earned his trust, and in turn, the widow began to feel a new kind of trust too. Not just for the man, but for life itself. Every day the two of them worked together. They fed the animals, repaired fences, cleared fallen branches, and tended to the fields. The cowboy moved with steady patience, never rushing, always paying attention to the little details that mattered. When the widow asked for help with something, he would smile, nod, and work quietly until the task was finished. He did not demand recognition, nor did he boast about his skill. It was a quiet strength, one that made her feel secure and supported. The town continued to watch them from a distance, slowly learning that the story was not about a challenge, a wild horse, or a daring ride anymore. It was about care, patience, and steady effort. People who once laughed at the failed attempts to ride the stallion now looked on with respect. Even children approached the ranch quietly, hoping to catch a glimpse of the horse or help feed the smaller animals. They learned from the example of the widow and the cowboy that kindness, patience, and understanding were stronger than showy bravado. One afternoon, the widow suggested a new project, expanding the garden near the edge of the yard. She wanted a place where vegetables, herbs, and flowers could grow, providing food and beauty for the ranch. The cowboy agreed, eager to help. They spent hours preparing the soil, planting seeds, and watering carefully. As they worked, they talked about dreams and hopes, not just for the ranch, but for the future they could build together. The cowboy shared stories of distant towns he had passed through, the people he had met, and the quiet moments that had taught him patience. The widow shared memories of her husband, the struggles she had faced alone, and the small victories that had kept her going. Their conversations were slow, easy, and honest. Neither felt the need to rush or impress the other. In the quiet companionship, they found comfort. and the bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Evenings became the favorite part of their days. After finishing their work, they would sit on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills and painting the sky in shades of gold, pink, and purple. The stallion would stand nearby, calm and alert, observing the world around him. The widow often smiled, realizing how much lighter life felt. She had spent so many years managing the ranch in her own heart alone. Now, with the cowboy by her side, she felt hope, trust, and quiet happiness returning. One day, while walking near the barn, the widow noticed that the stallion had grown stronger and more confident. He walked with a steady step, his head held high, and his eyes soft but alert. The cowboy approached, brushing the horse's mane gently. "You've come a long way," he said. The stallion flicked his ears, calm and responsive. It was clear that he trusted both of them, just as the widow trusted the cowboy. Later that week, the widow invited the cowboy to take a ride through the fields. They saddled the stallion together, and for the first time the widow mounted the horse with the cowboy beside her. The stallion moved steadily, responding to both of them without fear or hesitation. The wind rushed past them, the grass swayed, and the sun warmed their faces. In that ride, the widow felt a freedom she had long forgotten. It was not just the horse carrying them across the fields. It was life carrying her forward with trust, companionship, and courage. After the ride, they returned to the ranch and worked on small projects until the sun began to set. The sky glowed orange and pink, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. They sat together on the porch, sharing a simple meal and the quiet of the evening. For the first time in years, the widow felt fully present, fully alive, and fully at peace. The weeks turned into months. Seasons changed, and the ranch thrived under their care. The garden grew rich with vegetables and flowers. The barn was repaired and stronger than ever. The stallion stood quietly in the yard, calm and confident. Visitors from the town came to admire the work and the life that had been rebuilt, often asking questions and watching with respect. The widow and the cowboy's bond deepened over time. Their companionship was quiet but strong, built on mutual trust, care, and respect. The widow realized that she had found someone who understood the weight of responsibility, the importance of patience, and the value of kindness. She also realized that the cowboy had found a place to belong, a place to rest, and a purpose that went beyond travel or solitude. One evening, as the sun sank low, the widow and the cowboy stood near the fence, looking out over the fields they had nurtured. The air was calm, filled with the scent of grass, flowers, and the soft presence of the animals. "Life feels different now," she said quietly. The cowboy nodded. "It's steady, real, worth living." They stood together, silent for a moment, feeling the weight of their shared journey. The stallion moved gently nearby, a steady presence reflecting the patience and trust that had shaped the ranch and their lives. The widow thought about the years she had spent alone, guarding her heart in her home. She had faced storms, loss, and uncertainty, yet she had endured. Now, with the cowboy beside her, she felt a sense of completeness she had not known before. She realized that life's true strength came from quiet companionship, trust, and shared effort, not from pride, speed, or daring challenges. As the stars began to fill the sky, they walked back to the porch, settling in as the night grew still. The wind carried the soft sounds of the ranch, the distant call of a bird, the soft snort of the stallion, and the gentle rustle of leaves. The widow felt a profound peace. She had faced years of hardship, loneliness, and struggle, but now she understood that the hardest journeys often led to the deepest fulfillment. The cowboy reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. There were no grand promises or declarations, only quiet trust and understanding. In that moment, she realized that the greatest victories in life were not in daring feats or challenges conquered, but in the steady presence of someone who shared the journey with you. Through the months, they continued to care for the ranch together, always patient, always gentle, always present. The town admired the life they had built, but the widow and the cowboy needed no recognition. They had found something far greater, a partnership rooted in trust, kindness, and a shared love for the quiet, steady life they were building together. The stallion, once wild and fearful, now moved gracefully through the fields, a reflection of the patience and care that had transformed not just him, but the lives of everyone around him. The widow smiled more freely, laughed more often, and felt lighter than she had in years. She no longer faced life alone, and in the quiet of the ranch, under the wide sky filled with stars, the widow and the cowboy realized that the life they were building together was the truest victory of all. Steady, patient, kind, and full of quiet joy. The past had taught them lessons, the horse had taught them patience, and their companionship had taught them trust. Life would continue, full of small challenges and daily work, but now they faced it together, stronger, calmer, and more complete than either could have imagined. It was a life built not on daring rides or empty pride, but on shared work, quiet understanding, and steady hearts. A life that reminded them every day that trust, patience, and companionship are the strongest bonds of all.